I have told this story so many times now, to younger men at my club who ask why Loxley changed, to my grandchildren who cannot quite believe their grandfather once ran tame in the grandest houses of England, that it has taken on the quality of a thing preserved, like a rose pressed flat between the pages of a book. But I was there. I saw every moment of it. And I will swear on any Bible you care to name that I have never witnessed anything in 40 years of society life quite so quietly devastating as the night the Duke of Loxley heard what Lady Cecily Harrow said about her stepsister, and answered it. I should introduce myself, Lord Edmund Vine, if it matters. Third son of the Earl of Corsham, which means I inherited nothing of consequence except a decent seat on a horse and an introduction to Adrian Blackmore, then newly come into the Duchy of Loxley in the autumn of our shared 20th year at school. We were friends from the first fortnight. He was contained where I was easy. He thought before he spoke where I spoke first and thought afterward. By the time he became the Duke, I had known him 17 years, and I knew him as well as any man living. I knew, therefore, what people said about him, and how much of it was true, and how much was the invention of people who feared what they could not charm. They called him the Cold Duke. In drawing rooms they imagined he could not hear. They said he had never loved anything in his life except Loxley Hall and his horses. They said that after Miss Honoria Fell had broken their engagement, quietly, without scandal, 3 years prior, he had closed like a door slammed shut in a high wind, and nothing had been able to open him since. They were not entirely wrong. He was not a man who offered warmth freely. At assemblies he stood apart. At dinners he answered in full sentences when addressed and volunteered nothing further. He was not unkind. He simply was not accessible. Mothers of marriageable daughters had long since redirected their energies. He was a duke and he was 34, and he was magnificent to look at. That combination meant there were always fresh attempts each season, but the experienced ones knew better. I tell you all of this so that you understand what it meant when he moved. The Ashford Assembly rooms on the 18th of March were as full as I have ever seen them. Mrs. Aldridge, who organized these affairs, had outdone herself in the matter of candlelight. There were crystal chandeliers blazing above us, and wall sconces lit so densely that the room had a gold and amber quality, like the inside of a jewel box. The ladies were magnificent. The music was Haydn, played rather well by the Ashford String Quartet. I was standing near the east pillar with a glass of wine I had no particular intention of drinking, watching Loxley across the room. He was doing what he always did. He was standing near the windows, half-turned from the crowd, speaking to no one, requiring no one to speak to him. And she was by the refreshment table. I noticed Miss Alara Whitfield because she was not doing what every other young woman in the room was doing. She was not angling to be noticed. She was standing quietly with a cup of punch. She did not appear to be drinking, watching the dancing with an expression that was, I searched for the word later, composed. Not sad, not wistful, simply composed, as a person is composed who has decided to be sufficient unto themselves because no alternative has presented itself. She was not a great beauty. I will not say she would not thank me for it, and it was not the thing about her in any case. She had brown hair dressed simply, and fine gray eyes, and the kind of face that repays looking at more than it rewards a first glance. She was perhaps 27. Her gown was a pale blue muslin that had seen more than one season and knew it. She stood without apology and without appeal, and the room, being the room it was, therefore ignored her entirely. Her stepsister did not ignore her. Lady Cecily Harrow was the daughter of a baronet, and had the high, clear cheekbones of a woman who had always been considered handsome, and the eyes of a woman who was always aware of it. She had married Mr. Alfred Harrow 2 years prior, a man of good income and no imagination, which had elevated her, in her own estimation, from handsome to untouchable. She moved through the Ashford Assembly rooms that evening with the momentum of a woman who has decided the world is arranged for her convenience. I was watching Loxley. So I was watching the direction of his gaze, and his gaze, without his apparently being aware of it, had drifted toward the refreshment table, toward Miss Whitfield. I cannot say when it settled there, only that when I happened to look at him, I found him already looking at her. His expression was nothing, as it always was in public, but he was looking at her, and not at the dancing, and not at the windows. Then Lady Cecily materialized at her stepsister's elbow. I was too far away to hear all of it. I will tell you what I heard and what I was told afterward, and the two together make the full picture. What I heard was Lady Cecily's voice, trained to carry, as the voices of those who wish to be overheard always are, delivering the words past her prime with a lightness that was its own form of viciousness. I caught the phrase as clearly as if she had aimed it at me. The two syllables of prime with the particular brightness of a woman enjoying herself. What I was told afterward by Alara herself was the full sentence. Lady Cecily had turned to Mrs. Aldridge, who had the misfortune to have asked after Miss Whitfield's dancing card, and had said, with a smile so pleasant it had teeth in it, "Oh, do not trouble yourself over Alara, Mrs. Aldridge. She gave up hoping for the floor 3 seasons ago. She is past her prime, and she knows it. We bring her because one cannot very well leave her at home." I watched Alara's face as the words landed. She did not flinch. This is what I remember. She did not flinch, she did not redden, she did not look at the floor or touch her hair or do any of the small panic things a woman does when a knife finds its mark in public. She stood very still, and something in her expression, some faint particular quality I can only call the closing of a door, settled into place. She looked in that moment like a woman who had heard this before, and had decided some time ago that she would not give it the satisfaction of drawing blood where anyone could see. She looked, in short, like someone with more dignity than the entire room had managed between them. I looked at Loxley. He had heard it. I knew he had heard it because I saw his head turn by precisely the degree required to catch Lady Cecily's carrying projection, and I saw what happened to his jaw, a thing that only those who knew him very well would have caught. It was not anger, precisely. It was the particular stillness of a man who has resolved something. Then something happened that I had not seen in 17 years of friendship with this man. He put down his glass. In the ordinary way of things, this would signify nothing. Men put down glasses. But Adrian Loxley in a ballroom was a man in stationary orbit. He placed himself and remained placed, and the room adjusted itself around him. He did not cross floors. He did not approach. He stood until the evening ended, and then he left, and that was the whole of his participation in the social machinery of the county. He put down his glass, and he walked across the room. I will confess that my first thought was purely practical alarm. I thought, whatever he is about to do, I cannot stop him, and I must therefore hope it is not catastrophic. My second thought, arriving very close behind the first, was that I had never seen him move with that particular quality before, not urgency, nothing so undignified as urgency, but purpose. Absolute, measured, undeflectable purpose. He moved the way a ship moves when the captain has set a heading, and has no further interest in discussing the matter. Lady Cecily saw him coming. I watched her see him coming, and I watched the sequence of expressions that crossed her face, surprise, then the bright recalibrating smile of a woman who has concluded that the Duke is coming to speak to her. He stopped in front of Miss Whitfield. Not Lady Cecily, not Mrs. Aldridge. He stopped in front of Alara Whitfield, and he said, and I was near enough by then to hear this plainly, because the music had paused between pieces, and the room had the peculiar suspended quality that rooms acquire when something interesting is about to happen. "Miss Whitfield, I believe the next is a waltz. I would count it an honor." He offered his hand. I want you to understand the nature of this moment. The Duke of Loxley had not danced at a Ashford assembly in 4 years. The Duke of Loxley had not, in the collective memory of anyone present, asked anyone for a waltz. The Duke of Loxley was standing in the middle of the most populated room in the county with his hand extended toward a woman whose stepsister had just described her as past her prime, and his expression was entirely serious, and he was waiting. The room had stopped breathing. Alara Whitfield looked at his hand. I could not see her face from where I stood, but I could see the line of her shoulders, and what I saw there was a woman making a decision, not in fear, not in calculation, but with the quiet, collected deliberateness of someone who has decided that some things deserve to be met with the dignity they were offered. She put her hand in his. He led her onto the floor. I looked at Lady Cecily. Her smile was still in place. It was the smile of a woman who has not yet received sufficient information to determine whether she should be alarmed. I will tell you what happened on that floor, because Alara told me later, when she was my friend, and felt no need to spare me the whole of it. He danced well. She had not expected it. She told me she had not known what she expected, given that the entire situation was so improbable that she had not been able to think beyond the fact of his hand and the need to move her feet correctly. But he danced well, with the unhurried precision of a man who has done everything in his life from first principles rather than habit, and does each thing therefore with more conviction than other men manage. He did not speak for the first measure. She told me this did not feel like silence so much as it felt like a man who was deciding what to say and saw no reason to fill the interval with noise. Then he said, "I think you are too kind." She had not understood at first. "To stand in a room that has not the wit to deserve you," he clarified, "and to do it with the composure you have done it with tonight is a form of kindness the room has not earned." She told me she had not known what to do with this. She had said carefully, "You are very direct, Your Grace." "I am," he had agreed. "It is my primary defect, I am told, though I have always thought it preferable to the alternative." "Which alternative?" she had asked. He had looked at her then, she told me after a pause, because she understood I was asking, and I was a man who deserved an honest answer, speaking sweetly of things one intends to wound. She did not answer that. She did not need to. They danced the whole of the waltz. At its conclusion, he walked her back not to the refreshment table and not to the wall, but to where I was standing, and he said, "Edmund, Miss Whitfield, I believe you are the wittiest of my companions this evening," and looked at me in a way that communicated with total efficiency that I was to be pleasant. I was pleasant, I am always pleasant. It is my particular skill. I spoke to Miss Whitfield for 20 minutes that evening and came away knowing 3 things. That she was funny, in the dry, careful way of people who have learned to protect their jokes. That she was better read than half the men I knew. And that she looked at Loxley, when she thought no one was watching, with an expression that was not quite hope, but was in the same family, tentative and undefended and carefully kept at a manageable size. I did not tell Loxley any of this. He would not have thanked me for it. He called at Harrow House the following Tuesday. This produced a sensation. Lady Cecily was reported, by the housemaid who told the cook, who told the groom, who told my man, to have descended the stairs so quickly she nearly missed the bottom step, having assumed the Duke had come for her. She arranged herself in a chair of particular advantage before remembering to tell the footman to show his Grace up. He sat for 20 minutes. He drank tea. He spoke to both of them with perfect courtesy and directed precisely 17 of those 20 minutes to Alara and 3 to Lady Cecily, then made the arrangement in his quiet, irresistible way for Miss Whitfield to join a small party visiting Loxley Hall the following week. Lady Cecily, by the accounts I received, was in a state that required 2 separate explanations to her husband before dinner. I was part of the Loxley Hall party. Loxley had assembled it properly, 4 couples and myself and the Reverend Halford and his wife, so that it was entirely without impropriety and entirely useful. I watched them over the course of that Friday afternoon, through dinner, and on into the evening's music in the gallery, and I can tell you what I saw. I saw a man come to life. I do not know how else to put it. He had been not dead, nothing so dramatic, but like a fire banked so low it gives no warmth, and she did something to him simply by being present and by being herself that brought the fire back up. She disagreed with him once at dinner over a question of crop management on his home farm, and she was right. And he knew she was right, and instead of the cold silence I had watched him administer to other people who dared to disagree with him, he had said, "You are correct. I have been persuaded," and then asked her the reasoning behind her position with a particular quality of attention that I had not seen him direct at another person in years. And she had given him the reasoning. Plainly, without apology, and then without pressing her advantage, she had simply stated what she knew to be true, accepted that he had heard it, and moved on. He had watched her move on, as though he was not quite ready for her to. After dinner in the gallery, I contrived to stand near him while she was at the far end speaking to Mrs. Halford. "She manages her late uncle's farm," he said without preamble, as though we had been in the middle of a conversation. "Does she?" I said. "Since she was 22, I looked into it." He paused. "I hope that does not seem." "You looked into it," I said. He said nothing. "Adrian," I said, "when was the last time you looked into anything about anyone?" A longer pause. Across the gallery, Alara said something that made Mrs. Halford laugh. He watched it happen. "Miss Fell and I were engaged for 8 months, he said at last. "In that time I knew the color of her favorite afternoon gown and almost nothing else. I thought I was being attentive. I was not. I was being," he stopped, "present without truly attending." "And now," I said carefully, He looked at me. "I find," he said, "that I am attending." The second assembly was the Thursday of the following week. I remember it because the weather had turned, and there was a particular quality to the March night, cold and clear, with the kind of stars that make you feel the sky is closer than usual, and because I arrived a quarter hour before Loxley, which was when Lady Cecily made her second mistake. She made it to a larger audience than the first. Alara had arrived with the Reverend Halford's wife, who had kindly offered to chaperone, and was standing near the east pillar, the same, by some bitter irony of architectural habit. Lady Cecily came in at the height of the crowd, swept through it with her husband somewhere behind her, and arrived at the pillar in a cluster of women who included Mrs. Parsley and the two Miss Grovenhams, who were the finest conduits for gossip in 4 parishes. I was not yet near enough. I arrived near enough to hear only the end. "Has always needed to be managed," Lady Cecily was saying. "I do not say it unkindly. It is simply a fact of her situation. She is 27 and she is not handsome and she has no portion and no prospects. And if the Duke of Loxley was kind to her at the last assembly, it was precisely that, a kindness, and one cannot build a life on a duke's charity, however much one might wish to. She is past her season, and I think everyone here knows it, and I say so not to wound her but to." "Lady Cecily." He had come in. I had not heard him come in. But there he was, 3 feet to Lady Cecily's left, and the quality of his stillness in that moment was the kind that makes the air in a room change. He was not loud. He did not need to be. He spoke at his ordinary volume, which was to say the volume of a man who has never in his life needed to raise it to command attention. Every word was audible. Lady Cecily turned. She had gone quite pale. "Your Grace," she managed. He did not look at her. He looked at Alara. There was a particular quality to the way he looked at her, not possessive, not performative, but direct. As though he was speaking to her through the act of looking, and the rest of the room was simply where they happened to be. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment, in private if you will allow it." Mrs. Halford was at Alara's elbow by then, having come across from her previous position, and she was the sort of clergyman's wife who understood that certain moments require both chaperone and forward motion, and she said, "Of course, Your Grace. There is a sitting room at the end of the corridor, I believe." Alara looked at him. I could see her face by then. I had moved, and what I saw in it was the thing I saw on the dance floor, that careful, undefended thing she had been keeping at arm's length. She let it come a little closer. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will allow it." They went out. The room existed, for 30 seconds, in a state of suspended collective breath. Then everyone began to speak at once. I will tell you what happened in that sitting room because Alara told me, and because she told me honestly, without ornament. She was that kind of woman. She told things as they were. He had closed the door, Mrs. Halford having positioned herself with exceptional tact just outside it, and he had said, "I owe you an apology." She had said, "You have done nothing requiring." "I have not moved quickly enough," he said. "That requires an apology. I am a man who moves deliberately. I always have. It is a quality that has served me tolerably well in most matters, and in this one it has caused you to stand in that room for an additional week and a half and listen to things that no one with your particular qualities should be required to hear." She did not speak. "I am not," he said, "a man who speaks easily of." He paused. "I had a previous engagement, a previous attachment. It did not serve either party well, and it taught me that I had a pronounced ability to be present without attending. I told Edmund so last week." He stopped. "I do not know why I am telling you this, except that I find with you I am always saying more than I intended, and it does not alarm me the way it would typically alarm me." She said, "It does not alarm me either." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have been thinking about your uncle's farm." She blinked. Yes. "The Northfield drainage problem you mentioned at dinner. I have a man who solved a similar difficulty at the Loxley home farm 3 years ago. I could have him write to your estate manager if you wished." She told me she had stood in that sitting room and felt something shift in her chest. Not the grand romantic thing she might have expected, not the sweep of it, but something quieter and more durable, which was the realization that he had been listening, not performing attention, not decorating a room with his considerable presence. He had listened to her and remembered, and found a way to be useful to her, and he had brought it to her as straightforwardly as a man bringing a thing he has kept safe for someone he trusts. "Yes," she said, "I would wish it." He nodded, then he said more quietly, "Miss Whitfield, I am going to speak plainly, and I will ask you to forgive the plainness. I have found," she said, "that I prefer it." A pause, something in his face that she had not seen there before, not entirely controlled, not entirely composed. "I am going to ask your permission to call on you formally," he said. "In the proper manner, with your stepfather's knowledge, with every appropriate—" He stopped. "I want to court you, deliberately and properly and with the full intention of a breath. I would like to ask you to be my wife, Alara. I am not asking tonight. I am asking your permission to ask." She told me she stood for a long time, long enough that the candle on the small table between them burned perceptibly lower. Then she said, "You heard what she said." "I did. Both times." "Both times," he agreed. "And it did not," she searched for the word, "qualify me in your estimation, as she suggested, past my season, without prospects or portion." "No," he said, "it was the simplest syllable. It carried no embellishment and required none. No, it qualified me in my own estimation for failing to have spoken sooner and left you to hear it twice." She was quiet. Then she said, "You may call." He called the next morning. He called the morning after that. Within a fortnight, he had called 11 times and taken her driving 4 times and had a conversation with her stepfather, a mild and largely bewildered man named Mr. Elias Whitfield, who had married Alara's mother some years prior, and found himself, unexpectedly, conducting the courtship interview of the Duke of Loxley across his own study desk. That lasted 40 minutes and concluded with a handshake and a great deal of nodding. The county spoke of little else. I confess I enjoyed most of it enormously. Lady Cecily made 3 separate attempts to insert herself during this period. I was present for 2 of them. Both were executed with considerable skill and a total failure to understand that the Duke of Loxley, once decided, was not a territory that could be renegotiated. He was unfailingly polite to her, and always, precisely, somewhere else when she required him. He proposed on the 21st of April in the walled garden of Harrow House, where the first roses of the year were beginning to show leaf. He had spoken to her stepfather, his own solicitors, and his mother at the Dower House in Wiltshire, who had replied with a letter of 4 pages, 3 of which were expressions of relief so thorough they read more as a medical history than a correspondence. I know how it happened because Alara told me, and because I knew Adrian Loxley, and the 2 accounts together compose a scene I can render faithfully. He had walked with her 1 complete circuit of the rose beds without speaking. She told me she had not found this uncomfortable. She had come to understand that his silences were not indifference but accumulation. He was gathering the precise thing he meant to say and would not offer less. At the garden wall, where a stone bench sat beneath a climbing rose just beginning to show green, he stopped. He said, "I know what it is to be overlooked. In a different way to you, I know what it is to be present in a room and to be seen as something, a title, an estate, a reputation, rather than as oneself. I am not claiming equal injury. I am saying I understand something about the particular quality of not being seen." She had not expected this. He looked at her. "You are the most clearly seen person I have ever met," he said. "I mean by that not only that I see you clearly, though I hope I do, but that you see clearly. You see things as they are. You do not dress them as you would prefer them to be. It is." He stopped. "Rare," he said. "It is the rarest thing I know." She had her hands folded before her. She unfolded them. "Adrian," she said. He reached into his coat. He produced a ring, his grandmother's, he told me afterward, with the pearl and the 2 small sapphires on either side, which had been in a box in his study drawer for 4 years because there had been no one to give it to. He held it, and he looked at her. "I would like," he said, "to spend a very long time attending to you properly, if you will have me." She put out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. She told me afterward that she had not wept. She had thought she might. She had not slept terribly well the night before, having suspected the morning might bring something of this nature, and she had prepared herself for emotion of some dimension. But what she had felt instead was something she had not been prepared for, which was a very great, very quiet rightness, as though a piece of furniture that had been in the wrong room her entire life had finally been moved to where it belonged. "Yes," she said, "I will have you." They married in June in the Ashford Parish Church, the same building in which several generations of Loxley brides had stood, and the congregation pressed forward in a manner that strained propriety, there being a great deal that people wished to see. Lady Cecily was present. She had been invited, Adrian had insisted, pointing out to Alara that the invitation communicated, more precisely than any other instrument available, the exact quality of the Loxley assessment of the last several months. Alara had agreed, with a look that made me think she was one of the more strategically intelligent people I had ever met. Lady Cecily sat near the back. She wore a gown of deep green that was extremely becoming and entirely not the point. The bride wore the Loxley lace veil, 4 generations of it, 17 feet, pinned to her simply dressed hair by the Dowager Duchess, who had arrived from Wiltshire 2 days prior, and had taken to Alara with the specific fervor of a woman who has been waiting for someone worthy of this particular lace for a very long time. She fussed over the veil for fully 10 minutes in the vestry, adjusting it, standing back, adjusting it again, and then holding Alara by both hands and saying, "He has never been foolish, my son. This is the first genuinely clever thing I have watched him do." Alara had said, "I will try to deserve it." The Dowager had said briskly, "You already do. That is why he chose you." At the altar, Adrian Loxley, the cold duke of the county's collective imagination, stood with his hands quiet at his sides and watched his bride come down the aisle with an expression on his face that I had not seen there in 17 years of friendship. I cannot describe it precisely. I lack the vocabulary. It was not triumph, and it was not possession, and it was not relief. It was something far simpler and far harder to name, which was the face of a man who has come to the end of a long, cold road and found a fire waiting. He said his vows in the same voice he used for everything, measured, clear, without embellishment. And the words were the ordinary words, not improved upon, and they were the most convincing thing I had ever heard him say. She said hers in a low, steady voice, and she did not drop her eyes, and she did not tremble. He slid the ring onto her finger. In the pews behind them, the congregation heard. The murmur that moved through those assembled was not quite a sound. It was more a collective breath, a release, the sound 4 people make when they realize they have been waiting for a specific moment and it has arrived. I was in the second pew. I was not weeping. I will state that categorically. I was experiencing a slight irritation of the eyes, which is common in June when the roses are out. We went afterward to Loxley Hall for the wedding breakfast. The house had been opened and lit. The kitchens had achieved something remarkable. The gardens were in their earliest summer green, and the Dowager Duchess held court in the drawing room and was magnificent. At some point in the late afternoon, I found myself on the south terrace with a glass of good wine and the distinct sensation of being exactly where I ought to be. Loxley came and stood beside me. We were quiet for a while, looking at the garden where his wife, was walking with the Reverend Halford's wife, and saying something that made her laugh in the way she laughed when she meant it. "Edmund," he said. "Yes," I said. A pause. "I looked into it," he said. I knew what he meant. I had known since October, since the dance floor, since the cold corridor where he had told me he was attending. I had known since the morning after the second assembly when he had been in my library at 7 o'clock, before I had finished my first cup of coffee, and had said, "I am going to ask her. I only wanted you to know," as though this was sufficient, which it was, because he had never needed my permission for anything, only my knowledge. "I know you did," I said. He was quiet again. In the garden, Alara looked up. She found him across the distance with the ease of a woman who has already memorized the habit of finding him, and something moved in her face, that open, undefended thing, the one she had stopped keeping at arm's length. He watched her. "The farm," he said, "is in better order than I expected. Her uncle taught her well." "Of course he did," I said. Another pause. "She is going to be extraordinary," he said, very quietly, as though he was telling it to the garden and I happened to be there. "Yes," I said, she already is." He did not answer. He did not need to. He was watching her cross the lawn toward him, in her June afternoon dress with the Loxley lace veil long since set aside, and her hair coming a little loose from its pins, and the expression on his face said everything that needed to be said and quite a number of things that the English language has not yet found the words for. She reached him. She stood beside him and took his arm without ceremony, the way a woman does when a place has already become home. "Mrs. Halford," she told him, "says the roses along the west wall are the finest she has seen in 20 years. "They are," he said. "They were my grandmother's. She would have liked you to have them." "How do you know that?" she asked. He looked at her, that simple, direct look that said, "Because I know what my grandmother valued, and I know what you are." She turned back to the garden with a small, private smile that I think was not entirely for the roses. "I finished my wine. I thought about going back inside for another. I thought there is time." There is time, and it is June, and the Duchess of Loxley is standing in her garden with the husband who heard one sentence spoken in cruelty and answered it with everything he had. I left them there. Some things a man knows better than to interrupt.